So Sony is a pretty interesting company when it comes to mobile products. They're not really conforming to what's going on in the industry with the bezel-less screens, the dual cameras, and whatever else. They're just sort of doing their own thing and making phones the way that they see fit. And whether that's going to work for them or work against them, only time will really tell. And the Sony Xperia XZ1 is their latest flagship, and it's really just more of the same from Sony. But this phone does have some interesting things going for it. But let's talk about the not so interesting stuff first. If you've used a Sony phone within the last 5 or 6 years, the design of the XZ1 will look very, very familiar. It still has that overall boxy rectangular look, but Sony has done a few things to sort of freshen up the design a little bit. It has the loop design, so the sides are rounded off, which makes it feel a little bit more comfortable in the hand, but it's still not quite as comfortable as something like a Galaxy S8 or an LG V30. And this loop design has now been extended to the top and bottom of the phone. So if you look closely, the top and bottom are ever so slightly bowed out. So the phone actually no longer stands vertically on its own anymore. And in the hand, it does feel quite nice. It's completely made out of metal, so it does have a very sturdy construction, but the overall look of the phone just feels very dated compared to everything else we're seeing in 2017. And because Sony has been using this overall design for so long, it's starting to get a little bit stale at this point. Taking a look at the front of the XZ1, the display is not going to be the most eye-catching part about this phone. The display doesn't go edge to edge, it doesn't have curved glass, it's just a pretty standard looking display. It's 5.2 inches, it's an IPS LCD with a resolution of 1080p, but it is a very good looking screen. It has really nice colors, really good viewing angles, and it also gets plenty bright that seeing it outdoors, even in direct sunlight, is not an issue. And the software does allow you to tweak the colors of the display. You have a professional mode that will give you a more natural and flatter looking image. And then you have the standard mode, which is the default, that cranks up the vividness just a little bit. And then you have a super vivid mode, which really cranks up the saturation and the contrast. But this was my least favorite of the 3 modes because it looks really unnatural. So I just sort of stuck with the standard mode, which is a perfect balance between the professional and the super vivid mode. Now the bezels surrounding the display are quite large, especially along the top and bottom, but Sony does make good use of these thicker bezels by giving you front-facing speakers, which I do appreciate, but historically Sony's front-facing speakers have been pretty weak. But on the XZ1, there's a new smart amp now that's supposed to give you 50% more sound pressure, and it's supposed to make the speakers a lot louder, and they definitely do sound a little bit louder, but it's still not quite as loud as other phones that I've heard in the past with front-facing speakers. So while I do appreciate the stereo sound that you get with these front-facing speakers, I still wish there was a little bit more volume to these speakers. Just in case you're wondering, the XZ1 does come with a headphone jack, and Sony has always put a pretty big emphasis on audio with their smartphones, so you have a lot of support for a lot of high-res audio codecs, and you also have Sony's proprietary technology that can upscale any of your music to give you a closer to high-res sound. On the inside, the XZ1 has your typical set of 2017 flagship specs. So Snapdragon 835 and 4 gigabytes of RAM, and there's not really a whole lot to say about the performance of the XZ1. It performs just about as well as any other flagship with the same specs. It's very fast, it's responsive, it opens apps quickly, multitasking is not a problem here either with 4 gigabytes of RAM, and it also plays all the graphically demanding games perfectly fine without dropping any frames. So there's really no issues here at all with the performance of the XZ1. In terms of features, it's got all the typical stuff that you might expect from a Sony flagship. It's IP68, so it's protected against submersion in water or using it in the rain. It has 64 gigabytes of internal storage, and it also has a micro SD card slot if you need more. But one thing that it does not have is a fingerprint sensor. At least not if you live in the US, which is something Sony has been doing for a while now, so it's just something you have to live with. Now, as far as battery life goes, it doesn't have the biggest battery that we've ever seen in a smartphone. It's 2,700 milliamp hours, which sounds pretty small in 2017, but that hasn't necessarily tanked the battery life in my experience. I can still get through a full day with casual use. The key word here being casual, and that consists of checking emails, web browsing, social media, texting, and maybe the occasional YouTube video. But if you're doing more intense things like gaming a lot, or you're using Sony's 3D Creator app, which we will get into, the phone does tend to get quite warm, and in that case, the battery life does go down rather quickly. But for most people, I think the battery life is going to be perfectly fine. And of course, it does have the standard Quick Charge 3.0, so it doesn't take a whole lot of time to top off or fill up. So there's a couple of things that makes this phone interesting: the camera and the software. Let's start with the camera first. So the camera is a 19 megapixel sensor that Sony is dubbing Motion Eye, and essentially what this means is it can capture unexpected motion or emotion such as a baby smiling, and basically the way this works is it will actually take 3 photos before the one that you take yourself if it detects there's any unexpected motion or emotion in the frame. And it actually works surprisingly well, and because of Sony's predictive hybrid autofocus, it can capture these photos with very little to no motion blur. Every smartphone camera right now has its own gimmick, and the XZ1 is no exception. And the gimmick here on the XZ1 is that you can use the camera to create 3D scans through Sony's new 3D Creator app. And you can scan pretty much anything that you want, whether it's people's faces, food, or any other random object. And it works surprisingly well. I was surprised at how well it captures details on people's faces and how eerily similar it looked. And with these 3D scans, you can print them off if you have a 3D printer. But even if you don't have a 3D printer, Sony has partnered with some online 3D printing companies like Shapeways and Sculpteo if you want to print them off yourself. And they've made it really simple and easy to do through the 3D Creator app. And eventually you'll be able to use these 3D scans as a gaming avatar or insert yourself into a game once Sony finalizes the partnerships with those companies. The most important aspect of any camera, of course, is the picture quality, and picture quality on the XZ1 is just okay. In good lighting situations, you can get some pretty nice looking shots. The photos are vibrant without looking overly saturated, but the camera lacks a lot of dynamic range, and it really crushes the shadows that you lose a lot of detail in those areas. And in low light, the photos look overly processed that it makes noise really easy to see, and you get a lot of weird artifacting in places that you would not expect to see them. And highlights are also very overblown. You get a lot of lens flares, a lot of streaking, and a lot of blooming, and the lack of OIS really hurts the performance of this camera. The software experience on the XZ1 might actually surprise you a little bit because it's the very first Android phone to run 8.0 Oreo out of the box, and that's going to be a big selling point for the XZ1, at least until people start getting their hands on Google's brand new Pixel 2. And of course, with 8.0 Oreo, you get all the Oreo features they would expect, like notification dots, native picture-in-picture support, a revamped settings menu, etc. The list goes on and on. The only thing I really don't like about the software experience on the XZ1 is Sony's skin on top of Android. While it is very light and very close to stock, it hasn't really been updated to fit the aesthetics of Oreo, so hopefully Sony updates that soon, because right now it does feel a little bit outdated. So if you're looking to buy the Sony Xperia XZ1, it's available now directly through Sony or other online retailers like Best Buy and Amazon for a price of $700. And $700 isn't necessarily cheap, but considering we're in the era of the $1,000 smartphone, $700 doesn't sound all too bad at this point. But should you buy the Sony Xperia XZ1? Overall, it's a really solid smartphone and it does a lot of things well, and it has some pretty interesting things going for it as well, like the 3D Creator app and the fact that it's running Android 8.0 Oreo, but that selling point is going to be relatively short-lived, and I think only the most die-hard of Sony fans will really appreciate this phone. So if you really enjoy Sony's design, you really enjoy Sony's mobile products, then you'll really like this phone. But if you're looking for just a solid Android smartphone with some really nice features, there's there's a ton of better options out there. As always, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed this review of the Sony Xperia XZ1. If you did, please give it a thumbs up down below. We definitely appreciate it. And subscribe to the channel, which is also down below if you haven't already. And of course, check us out on social media, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, Google+. All that good stuff will be linked down below. And of course, check out the website as well, androidauthority.com, because we are your source for all things Android.